And today I have my special guest. She is the author of the poetry book, Miss Sayima. And
Hey Daniel.
welcome to Book 101, Miss Sayima. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Mm. My name is Sayima. I'm Tanzanian born and raised, and now I live in France. I'm the author of Heart Based, a poetry collection on a journey to rediscovering inner belonging and living heart centered in a performance driven world.
Miss Sayima, thank you so much for sharing your poetry to the world. How do you define heart based living, and why did you feel it was essential to write a book centered on this concept now?
It started out as understanding the meaning of belonging and what it feels like to feel centered and tethered. At the time that I wrote the book, I was living with PTSD from my family misunderstanding because of cultural and religion differences or beliefs differences. I'd been living in China for about 7 years, and then I decided to go back home, and unfortunately, it didn't go as I expected. And problems started when a member of my family accused me of being possessed by the devil, and finding myself ambushed in my childhood bedroom by a prayer group that was trying to perform an exorcism on me. So I had to leave, and I joined my partner, who is from France, who is French. And while everything was well and good, I was safe, I was feeling loved, but I had so many nightmares and panic attacks and other PTSD symptoms. So I was seeing a therapist, and it was helping, but it felt like there was something else that was needed. And so in my research and trying to figure out how to stop the nightmares, trying to figure out why I was feeling the way I was feeling, I started writing any emotion that came up. I started writing just as a way to feel tethered to something, because the feeling of just floating and not really having the same references that I had for my identity was overwhelming and confusing. And so I started asking myself if it is true that the people and the sources of identity that I had before no longer apply, then what is it that gives me a sense of being rooted? What is it that gives me a sense of being at peace and being safe and being at home? And heart based came out of that process of questioning, of writing down any realization that I had. And it was all for myself. I never thought at the time that I would ever share it. But after a while, I realized that the nightmares had stopped, and I was feeling more in the flow of life, and I was feeling more and more confident that I don't need to look outside for evidence evidence for how I should feel. So I'm asking myself these questions. where does this sense of rootedness and peace come from, I came to the conclusion of heart based living is basically finding that connection to the peace that can come from inside you.
Miss Sayima, how does heart base go deeper, not just intuition or just feeling? What unique qualities of the heart are you inviting readers to access?
I feel like the main invitation is to something that's already always there, something that's always talking to you. At least it was always talking to me. Something that, if I trace back to my childhood, it was always present and taken for granted. Like, I remember just wanting to leave home and not like not forever, but just, needing a bit of space and sitting by the river side and just enjoying a sense of presence that was very much taken for granted, and knowing how to access that. And somewhere in growing up and adulthood, it kind of was put to the wayside. And I think the poems and the way the book is structured, it kind of walks through the journey of trying to find your way back to it, to something that is is constantly just waiting.
Hmm. Interesting. Ms. Sayima, what are the most significant limitations of purely heart based decisions making that heart based living seeks to overcome?
Hmm. Could you repeat that? I feel like I didn't quite get the question.
What are the most significant limitations of purely head based decision making that heart based living seeks to overcome?
Um, the first part of the question, the limitations of pure heart-based living. Well, you have to gather information, I think, and for just the normal practical decisions. And heart-based living doesn't quite care so much about that. You could be totally content with where you are, how you feel, but you need to balance it a little bit with the practicality of things. But the good thing about heart based living is that you only go towards, if you need to search for information, or if you need to make a decision, only when it's necessary. And for the rest of the time, you enjoy the sense of not necessarily even needing to know what you what you don't even know. It already feels fulfilling just to be in the present. But I can understand how it can be tempting not to engage with the other side of practical things.
Definitely. And Ms. Zaima, what's one simple, concrete practice readers can start today to begin aligning more with their heart intelligence?
Hmm. I think by simple tasks like, do I prefer the yellow shirt or the green t shirt? And because the stakes are really low, but you can start to sense there's a difference in the way your body feels, the way um, the way you experience them, the a sense of enjoyment, and just by playing around with knowing that there is a certain intelligence that doesn't require logic, you can start to grow it as a muscle. Like, yeah, do I prefer this or do I prefer that? And waiting for the answer, not necessarily making a list of pros and cons, just trusting and waiting for the answer. So, starting with low stakes and enjoying that feeling. And with time, you start to see it arise in what would be considered, I don't know, big decisions. But fundamentally, it's kind of all the same.
Definitely. And Miss Sayima, as an author, what are your short-term and long-term goals?
I'm currently working on another collection, and I'm mostly focused on it. Long term, if wishes were horses, I'd like to have my own self publishing company. But for now, I'm working with a beautiful publisher, and I'm learning a lot by working with them. But ideally, I would hope one day to have an in home publishing company.
Good luck to your goals, Miss Sayima, and looking forward for more and more success. What would be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be an author like you, especially in poetry?
Um, I started writing poetry, not even calling it poetry. I was writing in a way that was enjoyable and a cadence that pleased me. And I wrote for beauty. So, beauty is subjective, and whatever you find beautiful, if nobody read it and you still would find it beautiful, I think that is one way of seeing poetry. So if you could just play around with that and start by showing it to people who are safe, people who will support you, and then at the end, I think naturally you'll find your rhythm.
Thank you for your advice, Miss Sayima. And can you share your books that influence your journey?
Um, from the top of my head, this one that comes to mind right now, and the order always changes, but the one that comes to my mind right now is the Tao Te Ching. It's a book that there was a year where I listened to it, the audio version, almost every day. And I don't know why, but I just couldn't get enough of it. I
Mhm.
so somewhere in the back of my mind, I think there's a bit of an influence there because I enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed listening to it very much. The other book, when I was young, one of the first books I remember reading is a Swahili book called Mahali Pasipokuwa na Daktari, which means where there is no, in an area where there's no doctor. It was written as a manual for people in remote areas, in remote villages that didn't have access to healthcare or immediate access to healthcare, to kind of perform first aid on themselves. I was pretty young. I was maybe, my mother taught me to read and write. So I was 3, 4 years old, and it was the book that was in the house, and I read it cover to cover. I read it all year out, and it was fascinating because it felt far from my reality, because we lived in, slightly suburban area, and they were talking about, you know farming seasons, and collecting firewood and things like that. And it was as fascinating a book as I later came to enjoy books like Harry Potter, and no other books that I enjoy now. But as a kid, that was like so much fun, and it's very hard to understand why I enjoyed it so much.
Thank you for the recommendation, Miss Yima. And can you please read one of your favorite poem in your book?
Oh, okay, I would be honored to. Um, One of my favorite poems is called Who Stole My Joy? It's page 113. Suspects, line them up one by one. Who stole my joy? Where was it last seen? What time was it? What was I doing? Who stole my joy? Freedom, lightness on my feet. That's how it was last seen. Who stole my joy? Oops, I found it. Carry on, everybody. Excuse the confusion. I hadn't lost it. I was just looking where it wasn't.
Interesting, Miss Yima. Beautifully, beautifully written. Does heart-based living connect to a broader emergence of feminine leadership principles in our world? If so, how?
Of what principles?
In feminine leadership.
And feminine literature.
Leadership.
Oh, leadership.
Yes.
I think there's a certain softness, a certain vulnerability and way of making decisions that heart based living aligns with, which is, I think, traditionally considered to be feminine qualities. In And right now, we kind of live in a place, in a world that is very much go, 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 and there's expected consistency, expected level of performance, which even biologically as a woman, it's not possible. There's ebbs and flows. There's times to rest. There's times for re stepping back and being in a place of just waiting and openness. So I think heart based living is more attained to. It's more aligned with that kind of philosophy, and that kind of understanding that leadership does not necessarily always mean being at the front and expecting a certain level of performance, but maybe leadership can also mean making space for whatever needs to emerge, and just creating a container for that. And I think both men and women can do this, but traditionally it's a role that women have played.
How did embracing your own heart based principles influence the level of vulnerability and authenticity you brought to the writing process?
Mm, I think my writing process, I never know what I'm going to write about, and that or if something will come out, and sometimes what comes out looks so ugly that it's very humbling, but it is what it is, and it's a good it's a good practice, I think, of acceptance. And I've gotten to a place where I'm very comfortable with that, comfortable with writing without caring about grammar, without caring about why this is the word that's coming out right now, and trusting the process something will reveal itself with time. And it can start on the notebook, but eventually I see it as a way of life. It starts to That kind of understanding or that kind of attitude starts to show up in your everyday life. I hold a writing workshop sometimes, and one of the biggest hurdles that some people have to go through is not to expect beauty or something that makes sense immediately. Just to allow yourself to write gibberish, to write, whatever comes out, and not being your own judge and jury, and just letting it be there, and knowing that it too is allowed to be there. And once someone gets over that hurdle, then writing is just fun.
Yes, just for fun. And Ms. Sayima, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in its fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in its fifth season as well, geography 101 in its fourth season, and my baby podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in its fourth season, as well as my movie 101 review and music 101, Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Miss Saima, if you could leave listeners with or viewers with just one actionable step to move towards one more hard base life after reading your poetry book, what would it be?
It's a bit of a cliche answer, but I think finding a way of meditation that you enjoy, and if it's and if it feels esoteric, then it means that meditation hasn't been explained to you in a way that you can relate to it, because it's the most natural thing ever. So finding 5 minutes of starting with 5 minutes of a way of meditation that you enjoy, I think is something that is one of the biggest investments to connecting with your intuition, to being heart centered, that you can do for yourself.
Yes, indeed, Miss Saima, and thank you so much for sharing your poetry book to the world, and hoping for more and more and more empowering poetry books to come. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your heart-based poetry?
Well, I hope you enjoy Heart Based. I hope it gives you joy.
Where do people can buy your book, Miss Saira?
Well, you can find my book on Amazon. and other retailers, online retailers, or you can go to your bookstore, your favorite bookshop, and order it from there, which would warm my heart because it will be supporting a local business as well.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Sayima, because if you support her, more and more and more empowering poetry books to come. So, Miss Sayima, thank you so much for your time.
It was grateful. I'm grateful to talk to you. It was really lovely.
Monica, people, see you soon.
Bye.